broadcasting now. K-Talk now. Turn this off. There. That should do it. All right. Hey, sorry, everybody. I have this so-called sophisticated equipment, and it wants to override everything I'm doing. And, all right, let's go with it. You're listening to, well, I'm going to do my stream thing here, Global Affairs Unfiltered. I'm Jack Stockwell, and now we can get on with the show. It says I'm recording, so I'm coming through, just like last week, on and off, on and off. It should be on now. Shouldn't be any problem. No on. And yet I'm coming across the recording. So I can't, that is really, really weird. That's all I can say. Gosh, I got so many things I want to talk about, and I hate to start off like a clown, but it does show me coming across the recording device. So it's March the 3rd, 2025. You're listening to the Jack Stockwell Radio Talk Show program, as well as, why does it keep doing that? It keeps switching to some other device where nothing is on. How can it do that? It keeps wanting to leave. It keeps wanting to leave my phone and go somewhere else. So that's really crazy. Like somebody's next door with a piece of equipment or something. Anyway, I will, I think I'm on now. And all right, I think I can do this. I can think, oh, good, 5 by 5, he says. All right. And the streaming audience is coming on. And look out the window here behind me. You can see the daylight. Boy, spring is on its way. I just got back from Phoenix. And I had a speaking engagement down there for 3 days. And I would say it is probably the highest recognition I have ever been given in the work that I do. I was down there speaking on the neurology behind the work that I do as a spinal expert. Let me just put it that way. At least a neck expert. And yes, I'm going to get into throwing that clown Zelenski out of the office. I'll be getting to that here before too long. I wish I could have been there. Didn't you wish you could be there? Don't you wish you could have been there? My point is, I just got back from what I consider the highest distinction. I was teaching a group of doctors who want to become board certified. Board certification in what I do is the hardest, most difficult board certification process in anywhere in healthcare that I know of. Harder than anything in medicine, harder than anything in dentistry, physical therapy, whatever you're involved with healthcare people that's licensed. And I say that because it's not based on taking additional classes and being tested and additional classes and being tested or some fellowship or something. It's based on actual performance. Can you deliver the goods, in other words? And it's based on being able to send in a set of pre and post x-rays of several people in a row and showing consistent reduction on that post x-ray where you bring the head and neck back into the vertical alignment from where it was in its misaligned state. That is not easy to do. It took me 12 years to get to where I could do that. And so I'm a part of a review committee now that checks and watches the work of other people trying to get to that level of performance. Well, the fellow who was my mentor in all of this and has been a singular voice almost in the maximal reduction of the spinal misalignment that causes so much pain inside the human body, as well as organ dysfunction, pancreatic problems, heart problems, liver problems, kidney problems, passed away unexpectedly last November. And he was the one who, this whole project, this course was his baby, and he's done it 3 times, and this one was the 4th. And I was asked by his wife to stand in his stead and take his place. And that, to me, was a higher honor than even being board certified in the work that I do, and I was board certified over 15 years ago. So, naturally, I ran off to do this. And as I said, I spent 3 days talking about neurology, the nervous system. The nervous system up here, for those of you on the stream where I'm talking about, the nervous system here, as the cord exits the skull, the brain stem becomes the spinal cord, and the nerve concentration of nerve fibers in this area is just so incredible that unless it's a matter of life and death, most neurosurgeons will not go into that area with a knife because they can't do it without cutting some nerves. And you don't cut nerves if you want optimal performance, obviously. So that's where I've been, and I had, trying to get back from Phoenix to Salt Lake, I had 3 delays, one after another yesterday. I was supposed to leave by 2:20 or something like that, and didn't get out of there till after about 7:45 or something like that. Nothing like sitting in an airport for 5 to 6 hours. But I read through the news because I hadn't seen much of the news prior to that except what I saw on TV with the what was going on between Trump and Vance and Zelenski. Boy, what a clown show. So that's what I want to start with, several aspects of that, not just what happened, but the American response, the European response, and the Ukrainian response, and the Russian response, in order to put this whole thing in context. And then I want to contrast that with what's going on in the Middle East. Because on the one hand, I just want to pat the president on the back and salute him and yahoo and rah-rah and, you know, America first and apple pie and the girl you left behind and all that kind of stuff. But on the other hand, what the hell are you doing when it comes to the Middle East? So I want to, for all of those that have in the last 2 days been deluged with the commentaries and the tales on the eruption that occurred in the White House, Vance, Zelenski, Trump exchange on Friday, or have for some reason you haven't seen it or evaluated it for itself, the single most important matter that was discussed there, and what really drew the attention of most of the pundits, regardless of where they are on the earth, the thing that was so widely, almost hysterically underreported and underemphasized, that far outweighs anything else that took place between these two, including the strategic mineral kind of stuff, or things that could have been raised in this exchange. It was enunciated several times by President Trump: you're gambling with World War III. Now, I haven't heard the TV people talking about that. They played it, but then all they talk about is the strategic mineral deal. Now, this is the 250th anniversary of the American Revolution, and after these explosive events of last week, and most emphatically last Friday at the White House, the practice and standard of American diplomacy, pioneered by Secretary of State, later President, still later Congressman, and a fierce anti-slavery advocate, John Quincy Adams, is, I think, the proper standard to which our nation must now return. The standard is incommensurate, particularly after Franklin Roosevelt's death in 1945, Eisenhower in the Suez Crisis of 1956, Kennedy in his October 62 Cuban Missile Crisis, his American University speech June 10th, 1963, and Ronald Reagan's speech March of 1983, announcement of the Strategic Defense Initiative, are examples of the John Quincy Adams standard. In all three cases, the actions taken by the presidents were in response to war or the looming danger of war. And so in a thermonuclear age where we find ourselves, particularly war involving nuclear powers, this has to be made obsolete. So both Vice President Vance and President Trump gently alluded to the small matter, a matter almost never honestly reported, that Ukraine has been decisively defeated on the battlefield and has no military capability whatsoever to win this war. It never had. It never had the ability. It can't. It couldn't, on its best day, win this war without causing, and this is why Zelensky showed up, without causing the United States to escalate to a possible World War III against Russia on the behalf of the Ukraine. And Trump just turned to Zelensky, I think more than once, you just don't have the cards, you bozo. So Zelensky has asked several times now of the United States, going back to Biden, for thermonuclear weapons. And Ukraine has attacked the pre-2014 territory of Russia with several missiles, these long-range missiles, several times. And it would be unreasonable as of now to think that a Ukraine outfitted with nuclear weapons would not use them in a heartbeat against Russia. And so President Trump made it clear that the goal of this administration is immediate peace. You're gambling with World War III, he said more than, I think, about 8 times. And it's one of the central reasons, if not the principal reason, that he's doing what he's doing. So President Eisenhower and Kennedy and Reagan seriously negotiated, or at least initiated negotiations with the then Soviet Union to prevent the outbreak or the accidental or the intentional World War III. And now President Trump has assembled a team with flaws, to be sure, I know, believe me, I know, but with the understood central intention of preventing World War III by replacing war with diplomacy to unravel the Gordian knot of certain thermonuclear extinction that was otherwise to be the fate of the human race in the not too distant future. I think it certainly would have been if Harris had gotten in there. And in a Sunday exchange with Fox News reporter, the new director of National Intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, responded this way to the question. This is the question. So what is the intelligence community's assessment of Vladimir Putin and his future ambitions? Well, if it was Blinken answering that question, you know that if he's not stopped, he's going to march right to Kyiv and then march into Poland, the Baltic states, and then Eastern Europe or Western Europe will be the next of his invasive powers. But he's not in there, thank the heavens. Rubio is, and if you've heard some of Rubio's recent statements that I find almost shocking because this wasn't the kind of position Rubio was taking before. He's backing down quite a bit. But this is what Tulsi Gabbard said in answer to that question, what are the future ambitions of Putin? She said, I want to focus, first of all, on President Trump's goal and the reality that's on the ground. That's the thing that seems to be getting lost in what we're seeing in President Zelenski's statements in the White House and the European leaders' response to that. President Trump recognizes the urgent need to end this war after 3 long, bloody years and has proven that he is the only person who can do it. President Zelensky has different aims in mind. He has said that he wants to end this war, but he will only accept an end, apparently, that leads to what he views as Ukraine's victory, even if it comes at the incredibly high cost of potentially World War III or even a nuclear war. So she says, President Trump is committed to peace and to freedom. We're seeing this big divergence here between his position and his commitment to these values and the interests of the American people and the interests of President Zelensky and the European leaders. This is an issue that has to be resolved. I know President Trump is committed to doing this, and that's really where the next step needs to lead. Then later she said, really there are two viable paths here. One is that this war continues on as it has for over 3 years. More and more Ukrainians will lose their lives. More and more of the country of Ukraine will be decimated and destroyed in what will continue to be essentially a war of attrition. And to what end, she asked? To what outcome? She said President Trump sees this reality, so the alternative to this, which he is so intent on, which he talked about continuously through his campaign and the American people voted for, is his commitment to ending this war and bringing about peace. So in the question posed and in Gabbard's answer, as well as in the post-Friday exchanges of other administration members commenting on what had just taken place in the Oval Office, especially with intelligence agents embedded in what goes under the name media, we're seeing the potential emerging of a higher diplomatic thought, leading to a higher order resolution of this conflict. And so this 180-degree turn by America away from 3 decades and trillions of dollars policy of perpetual war has to be bolstered. I mean, it's got to be strengthened by the American people gaining a clear understanding of why the international community, which is not Europe anymore, the international community is the global majority. The nations of Asia and Africa and South and Central America and then the transatlantic sector have to be given the knowledge that there is now another direction coming down the pike of American diplomacy. And it's not unprecedented. It is the American diplomacy of John Quincy Adams, of Abraham Lincoln, of Franklin D. Roosevelt there at the end of the war when he told Churchill, your colonial days are over. You know, of all the bad things people say about Roosevelt, they never talk about the good things. And then Dwight Eisenhower, what he did with the Suez Canal crisis and stepped right in. Told Israel, you back down and you back down right now. And then John Kennedy. Yeah, I know what you're thinking. And then President Reagan, who adopted the Strategic Defense Initiative. And of course, breaking with the British-U.S. special relationship, and I'm going to get to that here with Starmer, particularly regards to intelligence sharing. It is, if not prerequisite, certainly, yeah, I mean, with any successful negotiation for peace anywhere on this planet, that's got to be taken into consideration. So, the London farce, let me put it that, the London farce convoked by Starmer ended without a common position on anything after he got through talking with Trump. There is no plan. We heard some suggestions, said the Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni when asked about the peace plan that Starmer was going to present to Trump and on the wishful thinking that European countries sent peacekeeping troops to the Ukraine, which Russia will never, ever accept, mind you. She added that for Italy, this was never on the agenda. There's no... Starmer is wanting to commit troops. Macron is wanting to commit troops. Starmer is lucky if he can hold on to his government. If you got a couple extra dollars you want to burn in your pocket, send it over to Farage's campaign. I'd like to see Farage in there. Macron's on his way out. Schultz is on his way out. The people who have been pushing for war for so long now are on their way out. But the Europeans, as a result of this conversation between Trump and Zelensky, you know, they're screaming, and I think here this is Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. I think Thursday is when the European Council meeting is coming together in response to Zelensky's visit to the White House, and they're saying we urgently have to rearm Europe. So we have to rearm Europe because if the Americans pull out, it's up to us to defeat that horrible, evil force from the East. So the British politicians, in the wake of the Trump-Zelensky blow-up in the White House, are calling for Starmer's invitation to Trump for a state visit to Britain to be canceled. Don't get that guy, don't bring that guy over here. Starmer had already, at the request of King Charles, no less, Starmer was offering an invite to Trump to come to the UK. And now the UK pundits are saying, no, don't let that bugger over here, at least until he apologizes and finally says the right things about Ukrainian security. So the shadow Home Minister, Alicia Kearns, said just yesterday, quote, state visits should be conferred to the most honorable of allies, not to curry favor. No state visit should proceed until the steadfastness of the U.S. commitment to her allies is assured. His Majesty should not have to carry the weight of Keir's diplomatic failings. Then she called the Oval Office clash a degrading spectacle, performative bullying for a U.S. audience by Mr. Trump, and then said Zelensky is fighting for the survival of his people and innocent people being murdered by a barbaric imperialist dictator. Glad I haven't had breakfast yet. However, a Trump source said that recalling the invitation would be very unwise unless the UK wants to undo all the goodwill generated by the Prime Minister's trip. They said the best path forward would be to Sir Keir to persuade President Zelensky to apologize to Trump and to the American people. So a parade of senior British political figures made comments revealing that the issue isn't really a Ukrainian issue. It's the British control over their former colony, the United States. So former Minister for Defense Tobias Ellwood, a joint British-American national, said, it would be inappropriate to place the king in the position of hosting the president if the U.S. foreign policy shifts away from its long-standing support for Ukraine and toward alignment with Russia's security objectives. Dickie Arbiter, who was a spokesman for the late Queen, said, it's difficult to rescind an invitation to an alleged ally of Britain. I feel the only option is to stall until such time the government feels it's right. Ex-MI6 Chief Richard Dearlove said, they don't have to arrange the state visit straight away. They've got time to let the dust settle. Then the ex-Tory leader, Michael Howard, said it would be extraordinarily difficult for the king, given Mr. Trump and Mr. Vance's disgusting, disgraceful behavior. He said, sometimes, though, we have to do things we don't like to try to gain things for our country. We've got to see if we can moderate this behavior of this dreadful administration. Maybe one of the ways we can exert a smidgen of influence. Do you know what's happening here? Britain is slipping away into nothingness. Thank goodness. And they don't want to lose one of the commanding positions that they've maintained since the days of Churchill. So the British Prime Minister, Starmer, probably unintentionally told the truth for once, calling the current breakdown in the transatlantic ties once in a generation. A once in a generation moment, he said. And of course, he more accurately could have said once in 500 years, because this breach with the U.S. could well end the end of the special relationship, the end of the colonial era, perhaps even the end, heaven waiting upon this, the British Empire. So the European leaders are gathered today in London to lick their wounds after the Trump rejection of their panicked efforts to keep the U.S. tied to the empire's war policy. So when Zelenski showed up for the meeting, the Washington Post reported enthusiastically that he was greeted with cheers outside 10 Downing Street and a warm hug from the British Prime Minister Keir Starmer. Zelenski was also invited to an official audience with King Charles III yesterday, which the Washington Post made the disgraced Ukrainian leader very happy. So Starmer said today that he and French President Macron, possibly one or two others, would act as mediators between Washington and Kyiv, seeking a ceasefire plan that would be acceptable to Ukraine and Europe, that they could present to Trump. Macron said this to his French reporters: "Beyond the frayed nerves, everybody should return to calm, respect, and recognition so we can move forward concretely, because what's at stake is too important." Now, of course, what he means is continue to move forward, receiving American weaponry and missiles and bullets and launchers and tanks and armored vehicles to help the Ukrainians finally whip once and for all the failing Russian army. At the meeting yesterday, Starmer called on other European governments to grow their militaries to join a coalition of the willing to take up the slack in the Ukraine. These people are insane. You know, at the beginning of this special military operation in February 3 years ago, 22, probably outside of the NATO forces themselves, the Ukrainian army was probably the toughest badass army in all of Europe. And they haven't been able to defeat the Russians. What are the European leaders thinking, that they can throw together some kind of a hodgepodge force and take the place of the Ukrainians to once and for all drive the Russians back to the steppes? So Zelensky arrived in London yesterday and immediately flew into Starmer's embrace. Before he left Washington Friday, thrown out of town, Starmer called Zelensky and tried to persuade him to return to the White House, and then called Trump in an effort to lower the temperature. And his efforts came to no avail, as the Americans told him the tempers needed calming down before any return to the discussions, which was reported in the Telegraph. But I can see why Starmer would be doing this. Call Zelensky, go back and your tail between your legs and apologize a little bit. And President Trump, please hold on to your temper. Let's work this thing out. Zelensky's got a very important message to deliver. And then, of course, Trump is sitting there. Are you kidding? This madman is trying to create World War III. So among others who are trying to call on Zelensky to kiss and make up with Trump was the NATO Secretary, General Secretary Rudy, who told the BBC, I think you have to find a way, dear Volodymyr, to restore your relationship with Donald Trump and the American administration. That is important going forward. So Zelensky appeared to express regret for how talks unfolded in the White House. He said it was crucial for Ukraine to have Trump's support. And then Zelensky wrote on X Saturday morning, he said, We're very grateful to the United States for all the support. I'm thankful to President Trump, Congress for their bipartisan support, the American people. Ukrainians have always appreciated this support, especially during these 3 years of full-scale invasion. However, he added that he wanted the U.S. to stand more firmly on our side, defining security guarantees, what kind, the volume, when. He said, we are ready to sign the minerals agreement, and it will be the first step towards security guarantees, but it's not enough. We need more than that. A ceasefire without security guarantees is dangerous for the Ukraine. We've been fighting for 3 years, and Ukrainian people need to know that America is on our side. Well, British Prime Minister Keir Starmer said yesterday, apparently in a BBC interview, that he will not be diverted by the calls, including from the Scottish National Party, to cancel the invitation of Trump for a state visit. He said this, the central most important thing which drives me is what I'm saying and doing more likely to bring about a lasting peace or not. If the answer is yes, I'll do it. If the answer is no, I won't do it. I've seen people ramping up the rhetoric and taking to Twitter and saying that what they would do. Well, good for them. I'm not interested in that. Starmer says, I'm interested in what are the practical steps and what are the bridge building that I can do. What are the relationships that I can mend and take forward to take us to lasting peace in Europe, and in the end, that's my central concern. I'm not going to be diverted by the SNP or others trying to ramp up the rhetoric now. Now, right behind this, Scott Ritter, as quoted in RT, said that the February 28th White House meeting between Zelensky and Donald Trump was a setup. It was completely a setup to discredit and remove the Ukrainian leader. Now think about that. Think about that. Think about Zelensky is showing up in order to get a promise from the United States that they're not going to abandon the Ukrainian army on the field. And it becomes apparent with the things that Vance was saying, as well as Trump, that that's not going to happen. And then Zelensky just comes unglued the way he's talking, and then Vance comes unglued in response to the way Zelensky's talking. And then the president shouts him down. You're gambling with World War III. Now, Ritter is saying this was all a setup. It was a setup to discredit and remove Zelensky from the leadership position he has assumed. Because his elected term was over last May. And according to Ritter, quote, Zelensky is not a democratically elected president. This was a deliberate setup by the President of the United States. The Trump administration is fed up with Zelensky, arguing that the Kyiv regime's head brought it upon himself by openly antagonizing Trump. So according to Ritter, the relationship between Trump and Zelensky, he says, it is now fundamentally broken. Zelensky was the greatest impediment to the U.S. and Russia to achieve a peace deal. Ritter said he had to be removed, and now he has been removed. Now, he not only was escorted out of the Oval Office, RT reports an unnamed member of the White House staff that said that Trump basically kicked out Zelensky and the Ukrainian delegation and was begging to reset, but Rubio and Waltz insisted that Zelensky and his entourage leave the White House grounds immediately. So he didn't just get thrown out of the Oval Office, he got thrown out of the White House. Waltz said, remember, he's the National Security Advisor. So we made that clear in no uncertain terms. We made it clear that the negotiation, which could have been a fantastic day for them and the country, was over and it was time to go, as he's quoted with Breitbart. So I find this incredibly entertaining. I want to talk about yeah, I think I will. Oh, at what's it, the university there in New York, where the dozens of student protesters at City College were able to force Governor Hochul to cancel her press conference with lively chants such as, "Kathy Hochul, you're a clown. We demand that you step down. Kathy Hochul, you're a liar. You set Palestine on fire." And so the students were there to protest Governor Hochul's order to remove 2 job postings for professors to teach Palestine studies. Can you be more obvious supporter of apartheid than that? Going to the City College of New York and telling them that the job postings to find professors that can teach Palestinian studies were taken, the job offers were taken down off of the school's website. So New York police, with their zip ties attached to their belts, arrested 2 protesters and detained several others. And several student groups were involved, including CUNY for Palestine and Columbia University Apartheid Divest. This is what fascism looks like, said a City College, New York University student who did not want to give a name, obviously. He said, "This is what indoctrination looks like. It is, in fact, Semitic to teach Palestinian history, to teach Arab history, to support Arabs who are facing genocide, who are facing oppression, and go to a school or to a university where this kind of knowledge would be censored is extremely alarming." Now, remember, the Palestinians look at a Semite differently than the way Israelis look at a Semite. In the one view, Semites are actually the descendants of Abraham. And in the other view, the Semites are the Jews. That's why we say anti-Semite if you're against the Jews. But remember, the Jews are just one of the 12 houses of Israel that were all promised the land, even though they got dispersed and thrown away. And anyway, Barnard College, the student protesters there in behalf of the Palestinians, the school is now on a level C security lockdown because of all of the students doing the sit-in at the office of Dean Leslie Greenidge. These students are protesting the expulsion of 2 Barnard students who disrupted a class on June 21st on the modern history of Israel, calling the class Zionist propaganda. They should be able to do that. They shouldn't necessarily have the right to stand up in the midst of class and start chanting. But outside, they should certainly have every right to do that. So the New York police threatened to arrest the Barnard College protesters if they didn't disperse. However, in the end, several faculty members served as mediators between the student protesters and the school administration. At Barnard, a counter-protest developed, led by an Israeli assistant professor at Columbia School of Shai Davidai and a group called End Jew Hatred. Davidai has been accused of threatening and intimidating faculty and administrations, harassing pro-Palestinian students, cyberbullying. 13,000 people have signed a petition to have him removed from the faculty. So while things seem somewhat peaceful out here in the West, this is the kind of stuff that's going on back east. All right, let me see if I've got... Now, by contrast, Zelenski comes to the White House because Trump has cut off the flow of weaponry for the Ukraine's offensive actions or defensive actions now against Russia. And Rubio was very clear in discussing this Sunday, I guess yesterday in early morning news, very clear on that policy. And at the same time, he issued a statement last night announcing that he had signed a declaration to use emergency authorities. Now listen to this. He signed a declaration to use emergency authorities to expedite the delivery of approximately $4 billion in military assistance to Israel. And he boasted, quote, "The decision to reverse the Biden administration's partial arms embargo, which wrongly withheld a number of weapons and ammunition for Israel, is yet another sign that Israel has no greater ally in the White House than President Trump." I don't know about you, but I find that really bothersome. Rubio said, since taking office, the Trump administration has approved nearly $12 billion in major arms to Israel. This important decision coincides with President Trump's repeal of a Biden-era memorandum, which had imposed baseless and politicized conditions on military assistance to Israel at a time when our close ally was fighting a war of survival on multiple fronts against Iran and terror proxies. The Biden administration has halted the delivery of 1,800 2,000-pound bombs and bulldozers to Israel, but these measures had no effect on Israel's genocidal conduct in the Gaza. So on the one hand, it appears that Trump, I have to ask you to pardon me a little bit. I've been up since 2 o'clock practically, tossing and turning over several business decisions I have to make, and just tired. And and then listening to news clips and trying to catch up so I can deliver a decent program for you today to bring things into perspective. But the point I'm trying to make here now is, on the one hand, Trump throws Zelenski out of the Oval Office and out of the White House. But on the other hand, he reverses the Biden administration's halt of the delivery of 1,800 2,000-pound bombs. Where do you think they're going to use those? I don't think they're going to use them in the Gaza. They've already shown they can't beat Hamas. Hamas essentially drove the IDF out of Gaza. Probably for Iran, right. You're thinking correctly. And Israel has halted the flow of goods into Gaza in retaliation. It says for Hamas's refusal to agree to the extension of Phase 1, with the end of Phase 1 of the hostage deal, and in light of Hamas's refusal to accept the special envoy, Steve Witkoff, his outline for continuing the talks, to which Israel has agreed, Prime Minister Netanyahu has decided that as of this morning, all entry of goods and supplies into the Gaza Strip will cease. Now, that's not how you do peace. The Prime Minister's office said this, and I'm getting this from the Times of Israel. Israel will not allow a ceasefire without the release of hostages. Well, I understand that. Netanyahu's office threatening further consequences if Hamas continues to say no to the proposal. And then, of course, Hamas is maintaining Israel's continued genocidal policy, which is why Hamas isn't going to go anywhere. So I find it all, if nothing else, somewhat entertaining in the midst of all of this, because it's just crazy when push comes to shove how the Europeans are still in shock over this. Now, Zelenski, I'm getting ahead of myself here. Rubio had something interesting to say about that. He said, Zelensky's not acting like someone who wants peace. So in an interview with CNN following the February 28th meeting here Friday of Trump and Zelensky, Rubio was very straightforward in his assessment that Zelensky doesn't behave like someone who actually wants peace. He said attacking Putin, no matter how anyone may feel about him personally, and forcing the president into a position where you're trying to goad him into attacking Putin, calling him names, maximalist demands about Russia having to pay for the reconstruction, all the sorts of things that you talk about in a negotiation. And so you start to perceive that maybe Zelensky doesn't actually want a peace deal. He says he does, but maybe he doesn't. And that act of open undermining of efforts to bring about peace is deeply frustrating for anyone who's been involved in communications with them leading up to today. It's just, you know, is there an adult in the room somewhere? So Rubio says, I'm not going to fall into this trap of who's bad and who's evil, which is a big turnaround from the way he used to describe Putin. He says, at the end of the day, this is not a political campaign. This is a high-stakes international diplomacy and an effort to bring about an end to a very, very dangerous war. And on the role of the State Department, Rubio said, the State Department doesn't fight wars, it ends them. And that's usually, by the way, celebrated. He said, I think we should be very proud and happy that we have a president whose prime objective is to not get into war, but to prevent a war and get out of wars. Then coming back to Zelensky, he said, what I have doubts about is whether he's willing to say and do the things that we need in order to get a negotiation. My hope is that all this can be reset and maturity can kick in. He says, tonight people will die in this conflict, but we're trying to bring an end to this conflict, which is unsustainable. So the Russian, and Maria Zakharova, one of my favorites in the news, the Russian Foreign Ministry spokeswoman, in a statement issued Saturday, I think, called Ukraine's visit to the White House, Zelensky's, an epic political and diplomatic failure of the Kyiv regime. She said, with his outrageously rude behavior during his stay in Washington, Zelensky reaffirmed his status as the most dangerous threat to the international community as an irresponsible figure who can stir up a big war. It must be clear to everyone that this kind of attack coming from a terrorist leader is quite unambiguous. Zelensky will stoop to anything in pursuit of his goals and is obsessed with preserving the power he has usurped. Remember that, he is a usurper. He calls himself the president of Ukraine, but his presidency was over with May of last year. He is not an elected representative of Ukraine in any way or matter. She says this is why he has destroyed the opposition, built a totalitarian state, and is ruthlessly sending millions of his fellow citizens to their deaths. Under the increasingly deteriorating political conditions, this figure is unable to show a sense of responsibility and is therefore obsessed with continuing the war and rejects peace, which means death to him. So, of course, Zelensky flees Washington into the waiting arms of Keir Starmer. So what you see here are these little lackey states of the United States called Western European countries. They're all lackey states of Western global hegemony, as pretty well figured and postured by the United States State Department since World War II anyway. And this is definitely what was going on with Biden. Harris was going to pick it up. Well, you know, she wasn't going to do anything. She just get elected and then get out of the way and let Obama have his fourth term. But what's happened is in this breakdown and this turnaround on the part of the U.S. State Department, where is this coming from? Is this coming, is this coming solely from Trump? Is Trump really a true patriot who's trying to bring this to an end? On the one hand, but on the other hand, you see what he's doing in Gaza, in Israel. Dmitry Medvedev, the deputy chairman of the Russian Security Council, said this, that Zelensky had received a fierce scolding in the Oval Office. For the first time, Trump told that cocaine clown the truth to his face. The Kyiv regime is gambling with World War III, and the ungrateful swine got a hard slap in the face from the owners of the pigsty. That's a good thing, but not enough. We must stop military aid to the Nazi machine. Yeah, well, you never have to worry about what Medvedev is thinking. So, U.S. policy towards the Ukraine, what is it now? Well, the Trump administration policy shift, of course, is already underway with respect to Russia and the Ukraine. It's becoming more pronounced in the wake of President Trump's kicking Zelensky out of the White House. But one senior administration official told the Washington Post that the Trump administration is considering ending all ongoing shipments of military aid to the Ukraine in response to Zelensky's perceived intransigence in the face of Trump's desire to quickly solve the Ukraine conflict. Now think of that. That was reported in the Washington Post by one senior administration official. We don't have a name, but apparently they said Trump is going to stop all of this stuff going. What stuff? Well, if the decision, if taken, would apply to billions of dollars of radar equipment, vehicles, ammunition, missiles awaiting shipment to the Ukraine through the Presidential Drawdown Authority. And a former senior defense official from the Biden administration told the New York Times that the last of the arms Ukraine had purchased from the U.S. military companies would be shipped within the next 6 months. So after Friday's blow-up in the Oval Office, a Trump administration official told the New York Times that the president might even decide to end even the indirect support being provided by the U.S., which includes other types of military financing, intelligence sharing, training for Ukrainian troops and pilots, and hosting a call center which manages the international aid at a U.S. military base in Germany. Boy. So regarding the now moribund minerals deal, and remember, when I was on here, I wasn't here Wednesday. It was either Monday or Tuesday of last week when I was talking about, they're listing all of these strategic minerals. Not one of them is a strategic mineral. This was so odd. And the area of the Ukraine that is currently controlled, that has these strategic minerals, is controlled by Russia. And Russia's not about to let that go. So I just find a certain level of excitement here as all this stuff begins to break down. Now, Treasury Secretary Vance on Zelensky's diplomatic mishap said this. He was on Laura Ingram's show last Friday, and he said that Zelensky's Oval Office fiasco, he said, was one of the greatest diplomatic mishaps of all time. He told Ingram that he traveled to Kyiv earlier this month to work out the economic deal with Ukraine in order to show Russia that there's no daylight between the U.S. and Ukrainian people. He said the very tough 45-minute meeting with Zelensky was at a very loud decibel level. And afterwards, Zelensky had told Vance he wouldn't sign the agreement that day, but that he would sign it in Munich at the Munich Security Council meeting. And when that didn't happen, Zelensky insisted he'd come to Washington to get it signed. Boy, oh boy. Sometimes you just don't know when the door's been shut. So the State Department has approved new U.S. arms sales to Israel. So while we're shutting down, while we're shutting down what's going on to Ukraine, we're opening up to Israel, because the approval of more arms sales to Israel came out Saturday, I think, of $3 billion. The announcement came in 3 tranches. The first was for 35,000 Mk-84 BLU-117 2,000-pound bomb casings, along with 4,000 penetrator warheads valued at $2 billion. Then the second was for 5,000 Mk-83 BLU-110 1,000-pound bomb casings, along with 5,000 GPS guidance kits for them, worth $675 million. And the third was an unspecified number of Caterpillar D9 bulldozers at an estimated cost of $295 million. All 3 statements include the following: the proposed sale will improve Israel's capability to meet current and future threats by improving the ability of the Israeli ground forces to defend Israel's borders, vital infrastructure, and population centers. Israel will have no difficulty absorbing this equipment into its armed forces. But all this destructive power, of course, is not going to bring peace to Israel. Only the Oasis Plan can do that. So in a February 17th article, which would be 2 weeks ago, former Congressman Dennis Kucinich and his wife Elizabeth Kucinich reported that President Trump's talks of cutting the U.S., Russian, and Chinese defense budgets in half has already hit the stock prices of major U.S. defense contractors. While the U.S. I lost my spot here. While the U.S. major defense firms are experiencing notable stock declines, while European defense companies surge in anticipation of increased regional military spending, Lockheed Martin, General Dynamics, Northrop Grumman have all seen stocks fall, while companies as Rheinmetall, which is the big military industrial in Germany, BAE Systems, and Saab are benefiting from investors expecting a shift in global defense priorities. As President Trump pursues negotiations to bring peace to Ukraine, European governments appear to be moving in the opposite direction, increasing military budgets and deepening their involvement in the conflict. I hear my phone ringing in the background. All right, sounds like we're still doing good. So the Kuciniches are highly praiseworthy of the challenge they see Trump presenting to the military-industrial complex and, by extension, the U.S. Congress. Now, I don't know why, and you'll hear more of this tomorrow night in Trump's presentation to the 2 houses. And I don't think that's State of the Union, is it? I haven't heard it in the context of State of the Union. But while the military-industrial complex might be losing some stock value because they're not selling to the Ukraine, you would certainly think what's going on in Israel would make up for it. So if Trump follows through on his strategy of engaging China and Russia in parallel arms reductions while scaling back America's nuclear arsenal, I mean, obviously this is going to set the stage for fresh arms reduction treaties and a shift away from the perpetual military expansion, and the military-industrial complex isn't going to like that. No, not at all. So the Europeans simply are in shock. Now, when I say that, I'm talking about European leaders, not the European people. Most of the European people are like the American people, who want peace. They want to see some restrictions involving moving towards conscription, seeing their children drafted to fight this stupid thing in the Ukraine. But it's the leaders who are having all these hissy fits. The first response of the Europeans to the blow-up between Trump and Zelenski was one of shock. This is from the Washington Post. It's too fresh to give a serious and considered opinion on this. But it shifts the tone, but the fundamentals of why we need a peace settlement have not changed. And the diplomat who was not named said that Trump's aggression was striking Zelensky with the wrong tone in publicly challenging him. And this is how I started the program today, with this you're threatening World War III. And hardly has any news outlet picked that up. All they picked up was how they were arguing back and forth, and the kinds of things that Zelensky was pushing, and how Vance was responding. I thought Vance did a great job, but they're not. But they didn't play up much what Trump said. You're threatening World War III. Now, the European leaders are trying to rally to Zelensky's aid. They have to, because if something isn't walked back or something doesn't happen to make Zelensky look like he's still in charge of things, it is over with. So the European leaders said this: your dignity honors the bravery of the Ukrainian people. Be strong, be brave, be fearless. You're never alone, dear President Zelensky, tweeted Ursula von der Leyen. So the leaders of Germany, France, Spain, Netherlands, Portugal, Lithuania, Sweden, and dozens of other EU countries issued similar statements heaping praise on Zelensky and the Ukrainian people. And Zelensky, whom Vice President Vance accused of not saying thank you during the White House visit, remember that? Individually thanked each European leader who expressed solidarity with the Ukraine. Yeah, as he was being exited from the Oval Office, as he was being exited from the White House and the White House grounds, he never once said thank you for what you've done so far. So Kaja Kallas, Kallas, probably EU's top diplomat, said, we will step up our support to the Ukraine so they can continue to fight back against the aggressor. Today it became clear that the free world needs a new leader. It's up to us Europeans to take this challenge. Then French President Macron said, there is an aggressor, it's Russia. And there is a victim, it's the Ukraine. And we were right to help Ukraine and sanction Russia 3 years ago and to keep doing so. And if you've been following me or anybody else has talked about this, you know that the sanctions on Russia have done nothing but boost the Russian economy considerably. Merz, presumably the next chancellor of Germany, in winning the election last week, posted, he said, dear Volodymyr Zelensky, we stand with Ukraine in good and in testing times. We must never confuse aggressor and victim in this terrible war. Then the outgoing Chancellor of Germany, Scholz, said this: nobody wants peace more than the Ukrainians do. Therefore, we are working on a common path to a lasting and just peace. Ukraine can rely on Germany and on Europe. Meloni, the Italian Prime Minister, said, any division of the West makes us all weaker and favors those who would like to see the decline of our civil... Oh, this is just absolutely silly. But a good one came from Hungarian Prime Minister Orbán, who said, in contrast to all the others, he said this: strong men make peace, weak men make war. Today, President Donald Trump stood bravely for peace, even if it's difficult for many to digest. Thank you, Mr. President. And then British Prime Minister Starmer's called for the European leaders to step back for a moment of collect their thoughts and take stock as to what their next step is going to be. But I just think it's hilarious the more we get into this. Now, the NATO chief, Mark Rutte, spoke by phone with President Trump back on Thursday, I think, and he said this: the President and Secretary General discussed the critical need for a settlement on Ukraine to be enduring. They recognize the valiant Ukrainian defense since the full-scale invasion in 2022, which was enabled by the assistance of America and its allies, starting with the Javelin and anti-tank missiles provided by the first Trump administration. The Secretary General and the President agreed on the importance of Europe and Canada significantly increasing defense spending and defense industrial capacity, which will feature prominently in the NATO summit in The Hague in June. They agreed to stay in close contact and to meet soon. Now, in the midst of all of this, what is Zelensky saying? I've told you what everybody else has said, what Trump has said, what Vance has said. What is Zelensky saying? Well, he had a Fox News interview the other night that he learned nothing from the blow-up at the White House with President Trump. He said, "I'm sure we did something bad. I respect President Trump and the American people, but we have to be very honest and direct to understand each other." Zelensky was saying when Fox asked whether he regrets the exchange between Trump and Vance. He did say he thinks this discussion could have been better if it hadn't been taking place in front of the cameras. Off again, on again. I don't know what to do about that, Paul. According to this, maybe this would help. This is really weird that this is going on like this. But let's continue here. Let me just continue with what I'm doing. I've got some equipment command controls here open in front of me. So anyway, what I'm talking about here is Zelensky's claim that he didn't do anything wrong. He said, he said, "I think it would have been better if this hadn't taken place in front of cameras." And this is what Ritter was saying, that it's a setup. The reason why it was with cameras, the reason why it had a whole mess of so-called journalists in the room with them, all the bright lights and the microphones and everything else, was a setup to show, and that Trump and Vance knew what they were doing, to get so some real serious hysteria would come out of Zelensky, because he's on his way out. And the European leaders know this. The Americans, of course, know this. They've got to get rid of Zelensky, because the Russians have already said, we're not sitting down at any table that Zelensky's at. Zelensky is not the elected leader of the Ukraine, even though everybody's acting like he is. So the White House official told Axios Zelensky's interview on Fox was insufficient. They said, he keeps insisting on security guarantees with his economic deal, and we've made it clear that this is not going to be part of that. So Zelensky claimed in an interview that Ukraine wants peace and agreed to hold negotiations on ending the war. But he also stressed that was the reason why he visited the White House. And he said, I can't change Ukrainian attitude towards Russia. They are killers for us. It doesn't mean we don't want peace, but we want the U.S. to recognize reality. And so while Trump said he wants a ceasefire as soon as possible, Zelensky said, a ceasefire alone without security guarantees for Ukraine won't work. My people want to hear the U.S. is on our side. And I think it was either Rubio or Vance that made it very clear, no, we're not giving you a security guarantee. Which essentially means if they need more armament and backup, we would provide the armament and the troops. And they're saying that just isn't going to happen. Now, there are some Russian expert responses to Trump-Zelensky blow up. The Russian newspaper Kommersant. Thanks, Bruce. In an article translated and published by RT, rounded up some responses of Russian experts to the blow-up between Trump and Zelensky. Anastasia Likhacheva, I think it's Likhacheva, Anastasia Likacheva, who's the dean of the Faculty of World Economy and International Affairs in Moscow, said, Zelensky, with incredible persistence, demonstrated the behavior of a person without plan B, which violates any negotiation logic. The simple conclusion is that his main goal was to demonstrate an unwillingness to negotiate. Maxim Sushkov, who's director of the Institute of International Studies, said Zelensky pressed all the buttons that should never have been pressed in negotiations with Trump, both in his style of communication with the U.S. president and in the context of his arguments. However, one shouldn't be too optimistic about what was witnessed. The U.S. holds the keys to ending the conflict. It could disable Starlink, on which Ukraine's entire military command system relies. And within a week, the war would be over. But the U.S. does not do this because it feels it can extract even more from the situation. Zelensky's visit gives Moscow an opportunity for an additional move. It must be used wisely. Now let's think about that. We could at any time disable Starlink because the Ukrainian ground forces and the people running the drones and the people firing the missiles and everything else could be out of business by turning the Starlink off. Because Ukraine's entire military system relies on Elon Musk's Starlink. Dmitry Suslov, who's the deputy director of the Center for Comprehensive European and International Studies, said, the public altercation between Trump and Zelensky, the complete failure of negotiations, the collapse of the deal on Ukrainian natural resources, and Zelensky's premature departure from the White House have sharply increased the chances of resolving the war in Ukraine through U.S.-Russia negotiations, mostly on Russian terms. They've also started the countdown to end Zelensky's regime. Boy, it couldn't come soon enough. So, in the time we have left here this morning, and I appreciate the audience that you offer, certain things have to be recognized at this point. And I think with what you see as a collapse of the collective West that's going on, and the collapse of the unipolar world ruled by the West since the end of the Soviet Union is simply disintegrating, never to be fixed again. And that's what has these European leaders in such a fit, that we're entering into a period with what has ruled world state affairs up till this special military operation is now falling to pieces because the Ukraine is lost. The Europeans refuse to stop. They refuse to stop preparing for a war they cannot win and cannot afford to carry on any longer. So in a state of denial about reality, they sent French President Macron and Starmer and Kaja Kallas and Zelensky to Washington to coerce Trump to continue the war. Now think about this. We already know Trump's opinion on this. We know Rubio, we know Vance's opinion on this war. And yet some clown over there thinks that if they send a barrage of European celebrity leaders into the Oval Office, that somehow that will change Trump's mind. This is the arrogance of power. This is what gets people killed. And the treaty that was used by the EU leadership to effectively create a European constitution, including a provision to wage collective war, without the consent of the European people, after the 2005 referendums in the Netherlands and France on the creation of such a constitution was soundly defeated. So there is no constitution of the European Union. Now, Ray McGovern, who you've heard many times in one presentation or another, the co-founder of the Veteran Intelligence Professionals for Sanity, VIPS, posed this question the other day. Will the Europeans be able to stop Trump's peace effort? And he warned that the media is the major weapon against peace and that peace is bad for business. And he reported that former presidential candidate Dennis Kucinich and his wife had authored an article showing that with the breakout of peace talks in the U.S., the stock values of the military-industrial companies have begun a sharp decline. Whereas in Europe, where the leaders are militarizing their countries, the military-industrial stocks are booming, especially like Rheinmetall. So he ridiculed the continuing anti-Russia hysteria, asking if Rachmaninoff and Tchaikovsky were merely pumping gas at a Russian gas station. You know, Trump is not only saying no war in Europe, he's also saying no more NATO. Because Europe can no longer depend on the United States, we know that. Nevertheless, the danger in the Middle East is still great. I think we should recall what his friend, the late peace activist Daniel Berrigan said: the difference between doing something and doing nothing is everything. Dr. Jerome Ravenet, a professor of philosophy in France and the author of a thesis on the Chinese President Xi Jinping and a Chinese scholar himself, pointed first to former British Prime Minister Tony Blair's repulsive speech in Chicago in 1999, openly promoting Anglo-American imperial intervention in third countries, which became the basis and justification for many of the regime change wars by the UK and the US in the following years, which of course was amplified amazingly by 9/11. So the West has now worn out its power with all the color revolutions that we've done and all the hubris and how we have attacked the philosophical minds of Western civilization. He pointed to the Dutch philosopher Baruch Spinoza, who distinguished between power and inclusivity, showing that power proves to be impotent, whereas the Chinese policy of the Belt and Road Initiative shows the benefit of inclusivity. He said that the West has demonized China, denying that the concept of socialist democracy can even exist. So contrary to the Wolfowitz doctrine of Western superiority and hegemony, the great philosophers pointed to common sense in a multipolar world that contradictions do not mean declaring somebody else to be an enemy. In fact, these are the things that are required for a win-win policy. So, where does this bring us? Where are we now in assessing the things that are going on here? I want to put this in light of just kind of a review so far, because this meeting Friday in the White House is absolutely pivotal. Because Zelensky's visit to the White House just ended badly when he felt impelled to begin this rant against Putin after President Trump defended Putin over the Russiagate claims, which had targeted both him and President Putin. That's what triggered this explosion. And Ukraine and the U.S. were originally prepared to sign a deal yesterday. No, I think it's today. No, it was yesterday. To sign a deal allowing the U.S. to mine rare earth and other minerals in the Ukraine that would be announced at a joint press conference later in the day. So prior to that, as is President Trump's habit, he arranged for a small press gathering at his meeting with Zelensky before the formal press conference. And dead air, seriously? Now, according to this, I can see recording coming through. This is, I'm sorry, I have to apologize if there's periods of dead air. According to what I have here, I'm broadcasting. So anyway, all right, hold on just a second here. Let me see. The internet stream is working. Yeah, good. All right. So as the press opportunity was coming near the end, a journalist provocatively asked Trump if he was siding with President Putin after they had got through talking about it's tunnel. That isn't working. It's tunnel. I don't know what tunnel is. It's tune in. Oh, it's tune in that isn't working. All right. So after Trump had talked about Russiagate, then Zelensky asked Trump if he was siding with President Putin. Trump said he wasn't siding with either party, remaining neutral to try to bring the two sides together. And then that's when Zelensky went on his familiar speech about how Putin invaded the Ukraine and had to be stopped. Thanks, Susan. So Vice President Vance jumps in contrast with Trump, what he's trying to do to achieve some peace with diplomacy after 4 years of Joe Biden, who was supporting the war, and it was time to take the path of diplomacy, said Vance. And Zelensky, unable to restrain himself, then started to rant about how Putin had reneged on 25 agreements, even blaming Putin for the breakdown of the Minsk agreements. And Vance then proceeded to reprimand him. And I saw this a couple of times in the various news coverage. I thought this was great, where Vance said, "I think it's disgraceful for you to come to the Oval Office to try to litigate this in front of the American media. Right now, you guys are going around," thank you, Beverly, "forcing conscripts to the front lines because you have manpower problems. You should be thanking the president for trying to bring an end to this conflict." And then, of course, the hot exchange ensued between Zelensky and Vance, and President Trump had finally had enough of Zelensky's bluster and entered the fray himself that had been going on between Zelensky and Vance. Zelensky told Vance, "You are protected by an ocean. You don't feel it," meaning the war, "but you will feel it in the future." And then what happened? Trump says, no, don't tell us what we're going to feel. We're trying to solve a problem here. Don't tell us what we're going to feel, because you're in no position to dictate what we are going to feel. We're going to feel very good and very strong. You are right now in a very bad position. You've allowed yourself to be in a very bad position. You don't have the cards right now. And he then, pointing to Vance, he says he happens to be right. Zelensky says, "I'm not playing cards." "Yeah, you're playing cards," Trump said. "You're gambling with the lives of millions of people. You're gambling with World War III. You're gambling with World War III. And what you're doing is very disrespectful to the country, this country that's backed you, far more than a lot of people said they should have." Then at a certain point, a rather frustrated Trump said, "It's going to be very hard to do business like this. Attitudes have to change." See, that's where you see some of the realness of Trump coming out. As a result of the disruption, no deal was signed, no press conference took place. Zelensky and the Ukrainian delegation were first asked to leave the room and then to leave the White House. And the lunch that had been scheduled before the signing ceremony was thusly enjoyed solely by the remaining U.S. officials. So shortly thereafter, President Trump released a statement on Truth Social. He said, "We had a very meaningful meeting in the White House today. Much was learned that could never be understood without conversation under such fire and pressure. It's amazing what comes out through emotion. And I have determined that President Zelensky is not ready for peace if America is involved, because he feels our involvement gives him a big advantage in negotiations. I don't want advantage. I want peace. He disrespected the United States of America in its cherished Oval Office. He can come back when he's ready for peace." So the White House issued a statement. President Trump, VP Vance are standing up for Americans. Quote, "President Donald J. Trump and Vice President J.D. Vance will always stand up for the interests of the American people and those who respect the United States' position in the world, and will never allow the American people to be taken advantage of." Then after quoting himself, saying, "Let me tell you, you don't have the cards. With us, you have the cards, but without us, you don't have any cards." More than half of the 52% of Ukrainians want a quick end of the war and believe Ukraine should be open to ceding some territory in exchange for peace. That's according to a Gallup poll back in November. And since martial law was declared in Ukraine, 1,050,000 Ukrainians have been drafted into military service, pointing out the average age of Ukrainian troops is 43. Then the statement concluded, and this was a statement from the White House. Vice President Vance, you went to Pennsylvania and campaigned for the opposition in October. Zelensky, who was in New York in September for the UN General Assembly, was flown to Pennsylvania on an Air Force C-17 plane where he visited an arms plant with the Democratic governor and publicly made attacks on Vice President J.D. Vance. And then remember when Starmer was in the White House last weekend trying to get Trump to re-up the commitment of the United States to help the Ukrainians with more war material, it was Starmer who had sent over 100 British diplomats to spread out around the country to help make sure Kamala Harris got elected. So this is, every now and then something comes down the pike that is a real turning point. And so this is what London's Economist magazine said. A disaster in the White House for Volodymyr Zelensky and for Ukraine. Following what it described as the Friday fiasco between Zelensky and Trump and Vance, then the article glimly reported, when Volodymyr Zelensky arrived at the White House on February 28th, the American-Ukrainian relationship was fragile and uncertain. By the time the Ukrainian president left, it was shattered. Then a second article by a U.S. digital editor, Stephanie Studer, said, the week has ended disastrously for Volodymyr Zelensky. A trip to Washington that was meant to ease tensions instead descended into a televised shouting match with Donald Trump and J.D. Vance in the Oval Office. The breakdown in relations raises two questions. Could Mr. Trump now truly abandon Ukraine? Will Mr. Zelensky feel forced to resign to save his country? One outcome, at least, is clear. This is a boost for Vladimir Putin. Now, I always like the verbiage that comes out of the Russians. The foreign minister, deputy foreign minister, Sergei Ryabkov, who's Russia's point person for the discussions that are now underway in the U.S. after the very significant February 12th phone call between Trump and Putin, he had this to say. We record and carefully analyze all signals from Washington, especially from the top man. I must say that the tone of contacts in recent days really differed substantially from what there has been in the past. We welcome that change of tone on the American side and are ourselves ready for businesslike and practical dialogue. But the extent to which the change of tone and nature of the statements may be transformed into practical actions and how quickly that may happen is an open question for me. When we go further, we'll understand better whether or not there is really a genuine, implementable chance of achieving rapid shifts for the better. Then asked if Russia had a clear sense of Trump's peace plan, Rabkov said, as of today, we have not gained a great understanding. We can most likely say with certainty that the American side would like to move toward a ceasefire soon. But as we emphasized both in Riyadh and earlier, a ceasefire without long-term settlement is a path to a rapid resumption of fire and the resumption of the conflict with even more severe consequences, including consequences for Russian-American relations, and we don't want that. So, the strategic situation is presently undergoing not one but several tectonic changes. I mean, these changes are effectively burying the unipolar order that emerged after World War II, and then again in a new form after the end of the Cold War. And Francis Fukuyama's thesis on the end of history, by which he meant world domination by the Western liberal model of democracy, he says, turned out to be one of the most short-lived eras in history. So following President Trump's return to the White House, the transatlantic relationship very quickly shattered with a deafening burst of noise. Now, this is what London's Financial Times said this weekend. The U.S. is now the enemy of the West. In its front page article, which concluded, the West is dead. The special relationship between the U.S. and the U.K., which was the pillar of the unipolar world, has been broken, never to be restored. Woo! It is now coming to light that the pro-European Union forces in Europe were allied with the very same deep state, sometimes referred to as the permanent bureaucracy, under attack by the Trump administration. And since Vice President J.D. Vance's remarks at the Munich Security Conference about the lack of democratic practices in Europe struck such a raw nerve, it signals an end of the European permanent bureaucracy. So if President Trump succeeds in not only ending the Ukraine war, but also permanently banning our species' threatened use of nuclear weapons through a process of cooperation and dialogue with Russia and China, he certainly will deserve a place on Mount Rushmore. I mean, this would mean nothing less than replacing the practice of geopolitical confrontation against the BRICS states and the global South with cooperation for the mutual benefit of all. Then the second tectonic change is marked by the process in which the nations of the global South are presently overcoming 500 years of colonialism with the help of China and moving to become middle-level income countries in the near term. And instead of regarding this development as a threat, the European nations and the United States should happily welcome the elimination of this horrible, grinding poverty for billions of people who are now being liberated to achieve their full potential. The only way the danger of global nuclear war and the subsequent annihilation of the human species can be overcome is by cooperation with the global majority. So we're experiencing a very unprecedented change in the strategic situation, and one that can actually say that these tectonic shifts that are going on, which leave some people just completely flabbergasted. I mean, they don't quite get what is happening. A lot of people here in America, they're members of Congress. When asked to comment on what happened in the White House Friday, simply don't seem to get what's going on. I mean, what one can say is that the so-called collective West, which tried to dominate the world through a unipolar world order, especially after the end of the Cold War, no longer exists. I mean, it's just a little more than 4 weeks of Trump in the White House. There's a split between the United States and Europe, which is quite remarkable. Never to be fixed again, it looks like. I mean, the Europeans have not quite reflected on that policy failure. The Ukraine war is as good as lost. And Trump has said he does not want to continue to supply weapons or money to Ukraine. And the Europeans are now saying that they want to keep fueling the war by potentially sending European troops into the Ukraine. Trump has already refused to give an American backstop for this. So are the Europeans capable of doing this? I mean, if you look at the state of the economy in Great Britain and France, and especially in Germany, which is in free fall, it is completely unlikely that they'd be able to staff enough people to get the job done. So the Europeans, I think, have not quite reflected on this policy failure. Because Ukraine, as I said, the war is as good as lost, and Trump says he doesn't want to continue to supply weapons or money to the Ukraine. And the Europeans now, and then you see what Putin, even Lavrov, what Putin said about foreign troops showing up in the Ukraine. They'll be destroyed. They're military targets. They will be destroyed. You call them peacekeeping all you want. And if you look at the state of the economy in Great Britain and France right now, and especially Germany, which is in a free fall, I mean, there's estimates by some of the think tanks that it would immediately require 300,000 more troops from Europe, 250 billion euros, and that's just for starters. You know, is Europe capable of maintaining that? Extremely doubtful. So the Europeans are unable to assess what happened, and even the effort to try and continue the war, which is already lost, would only increase the number of people dying for nothing. I mean, obviously there's an amazing lack of reality in the thinking of the Europeans, who've been in a shadow, so to speak, of the Anglo-American dominance the whole time, always pretending to be strong, but in reality, they have zero sovereignty outside of any NATO or European Union alliance. And now that they're almost being forced to get into a situation where they have to stand up as individual sovereign nations, they don't have the money to do it. They don't have the wherewithal to do it. They certainly don't have the individual army to do it, because they've been lackeys of the United States through NATO involvement for decades. And essentially what's happened in the last 5 weeks now, or whatever, of the administration, the new administration, we're not going to be the European masters anymore. So at this point, the Europeans are kind of changing the doorknob in Washington. You know, first Macron came, supposedly representing the EU, but not having anything coordinated with the European Union members. And remember the outcry when Orban did something like that at the beginning of the Hungarian presidency. And then Macron was treated politely by Trump, but nothing of substance was agreed upon. Then Starmer comes, makes this huge effort, delivering an invitation from King Charles for a state visit, hoping to repair the Anglo-American special relationship. But when the question came up of whether the U.S. would give a backstop to the potential deployment of European troops to Ukraine, the answer was no. No, no substance to that visit. So Zelensky shows up supposedly to make this gigantic economic treaty whereby the United States will explore and exploit, rare earth minerals and resources in the Ukraine. And if you look at that deal more closely, it could very well turn out to be a big nothing burger, because according to some Western scientific think tank, the rare earth minerals in Ukraine have never really been investigated thoroughly. I talked about this at the beginning of last week. And when they listed all the minerals that are there for development, not one of them is a rare earth mineral. And most of those deposits are in territory occupied by Russia, and Russia isn't about to give it up. And so when Starmer went to Kyiv several months ago to conclude a 100-year treaty with the Ukraine, but also include some agreement about who would exploit those rare earth minerals, I wouldn't be surprised if this whole thing detonates as the laid egg that it is. So what is going on with the Europeans? I mean, the whole world is scratching their heads and saying, what happened to these Europeans? It's the arrogance of power. And once that arrogance has been attacked by the new motives of reality, and the arrogance disappears, there's nothing left behind. You know, in 2005, there was this referendum in France and in Holland about a European constitution, which was supposed to create some kind of European state. And that was rejected overwhelmingly, both in France and in Holland. They didn't want to continue, so as a group of people, Amato and various others got together and practically rewrote the European Constitution by changing about 5% of it. Then with a big hurrah, it was renamed the Lisbon Treaty, because a treaty doesn't require a referendum. Then in great secrecy, they made all these heretical changes in all the paragraphs, but they never published it. I mean, they only published the changes. So of a great gigantic treaty of about 1,500 pages, the parliamentarians who would have had to have a vote on it would have had to put the changes into the treaty, making it even more incomprehensible, because everything was in legal language. You imagine the American Constitution being 1,500 pages? So Europe is upside down and inside out right now. And so when I see the statements from von der Leyen and Stoltenberg, I see the new statements from Merz, who probably will end up being the German chancellor. No wonder they're scared. And if you read the Lisbon Treaty, it is already now obliging all the members that if one of them is attacked, they have to come to the military aid of all the others. So de facto, given the overlapping membership between the EU and NATO, a de facto militarization of the European Union. And that militarization is going on right now full speed. And you got all these efforts to increase the budgets, not only to make Germany war ready, which is what Pistorius has been pushing. I mean, there is tremendous propaganda about this. The first channel of German TV had a 10-minute clip on how fantastic the working conditions are in Rheinmetall, the largest of the Germany weapons producers. And just total propaganda. I saw some clips of this, in the middle of the night, some news program this last few days when I was in Phoenix. And Europe is really scrambling right now. Scrambling not only for their existence, but for identity. I mean, who are we? What will we be without the United States? Where's our security? Where's our security architecture? And this is where Putin comes in. I mean, Putin's talking about the possibility of global security architecture, which would be a major change for the good. It kind of opens the window for the settlement of all the other conflicts around the globe, especially, hopefully, the one that's in the Middle East. And speaking of that, the so-called ceasefires continuing with interruptions here and there, but there was this delegation of Israel and Qatar arriving in Cairo to discuss the second phase of the ceasefire. And the ceasefire is more or less holding, but not totally, but there was an exchange of 4 dead hostages by Hamas and more than 600 Palestinians by the Israelis. And the situation in the West Bank remains horrible. 4 refugee camps were emptied. This is still in total disarray. And the Israelis also refused to leave the Philadelphia corridor, the road between Gaza and Egypt. The IDF has started to make an investigation about the colossal intelligence failure of October 7th. It's just things are being kicked around. It's coming to a point where it's beginning to be more and more obvious all the time. The deep state, the permanent bureaucracy that we know as Europe, is falling apart. And why don't you see regime change in China? Because China's making money. The Chinese citizens' lives are improving almost every day. 850 million Chinese people have been lifted out of the worst of poverty and now are making money, supporting families, expanding their own entrepreneurial interests, even in the midst of a totalitarian political state. And Russia doesn't want to, or Chinese doesn't want war with anybody. The Chinese don't. The nation of China doesn't. They just want to do business. And most Americans, same thing. They crave, they pray for peace, to raise their families. And I think more and more of these people are beginning to understand the kind of program they've been under for so long. Look here in America with Doge and all the waste money that they're discovering, billions and billions of waste. And there's a regular Doge announcement now, at least at Fox, about the latest that they've uncovered. Now they're talking about the possibility of a successful audit of the Pentagon, which hasn't happened in a long time. It's just, it gives me a lot of hope. It still gives me a lot of hope. So despite the failure of Zelenski getting what he wanted and the Starmer meeting with Trump, all sizzle but no steak, as they say, you can't help but feeling a little bit proud of the way Trump and Vance handled themselves against Zelenski in the White House last Friday. But then you look at Gaza for even a moment, and they have the ability to stop the same thing there. They don't have to do anything but stop the flow of weapons. And their excuse is Israel bought a bunch of weapons months ago, and they want these weapons delivered. When I think the American government could just insist that money be refunded. All right, now, I got several things I want to talk about regarding Israel, but we're kind of out of time, so I'll probably start with that tomorrow. I just want to mention to you, Jack's packs are in their final development. They're boxes, small little boxes that have within them the supplements that are necessary and a description of the supplements and the dosage for boosting immunity, especially since we're still in cold and flu season, satisfying digestive problems, helping to balance out female endocrine problems, things relative to And we'll cover a lot of different subjects, but those are kind of the basic ones. That so when people come in and, I don't have men coming into my clinic and talking about their emotional upset or their emotional imbalances or their PMS or different things like this or postmenopausal problems or issues. But we sure have a lot of ladies coming in talking about these things. And so we're putting these packets together so that here's your answer at a discounted price. You buy it in Jack's pack, you're going to get it at a discounted price than if you bought all these things separate. I think this will expedite things. It'll save time for my staff to answer questions of this nature. And for immunity, children's immunity, adult immunity, it's pretty much the same. For cold and flu. So there's digestion, cold and flu. I think liver support might be in there, kidney stuff. I had the list, but I misplaced it. But there's about 4 or 5 basic things. But we can put a Jack's pack together. Just let us know what you're interested in, and you can get a nice discounted price on the whole thing. Once we have this up and running, I'll have videos at forbiddendoctor.com explaining these things, and I think this is going to be a good push forward for what we're trying to achieve. There's still some more organization and some changes that need to go into it in order to get the job done correctly. But anyway, I'm pretty excited about that, and I really am excited about world affairs. If you keep the discussion away from the Middle East, I feel pretty good about the whole thing. And I'm not trying to be funny. The Middle East thing still has me very concerned, but I do not believe the United States would assist Israel in an attack against Iran, which means any attack against Iran is out of the question. I don't think it's going to happen. Thank goodness. And there may be, now that the Europeans have seen where the United States feels about the Ukraine, after this little debate between the president, the vice president, and Zelenski this last Friday, there may be some Reichstag type of thing taking place here before too terribly long to turn this thing around, where I think there is great hope, great precedence for peace to be established and the end of this war. So that should do it for today. I appreciate your listenership and being a part of the program. You keep your wits about you and study this for yourself. I'll see you tomorrow. And for those of you on the stream, I greatly appreciate you helping with this. Just like and share this as much as you can. Now that I was able to finish most of what I needed to do for this seminar in Phoenix, I think I'm going to be spending a lot more time on smaller broadcasts of hot issues that may only take a few minutes, but it will keep things up to date. So I will see all of you tomorrow as well